I was in Dublin City on Saturday for the Time for Change protest, which took place at Custom House Quay, and it was organised by the Yellow Vest Ireland group. I'd like to congratulate Glenn Miller and his team for a really great event. Fantastic atmosphere, some wonderful speeches, and a really great turnout. As you know, I've already uploaded the speech that Dolores Cahill gave, and there's a couple more that I'm going to upload probably on my BitChute channel. Antifa showed up to try to cause some trouble, as you might expect, but it was ultimately pretty minor, and they were kept well apart from us by the police. It's becoming clear that our numbers are growing very steadily, which I have to say is extremely encouraging. After the protest ended, I had lunch with some friends, and afterwards we walked through town. For the second Saturday in a row, I observed this truly dystopian new abnormal Dublin. There's a great many people wearing face masks outside, walking down the street or in their cars, and they haven't been asked to do that. It's not mandatory for them to wear face masks when walking down the street. It is mandatory for them to wear face coverings on public transport, but a lot of people are voluntarily wearing them outdoors. And when you see that, you think to yourself, boy, we have a lot of work ahead of us. The mask clearly shows who's bought the scam, and the sheer volume of people who are doing that is kind of staggering. Tanya from Keep Britain Free tweeted this: "Ask anyone who's voluntarily wearing a mask, how long are you going to keep wearing that thing? They won't be able to answer you because their mind is no longer their own." Now, what they may reply with is, until the pandemic is over, which it is already, of course. Basically, they're not going to stop wearing the mask until the government and the media tells them that it's okay for them to stop wearing it, or until there's a vaccine. But as we've seen time and time again, the goalposts keep getting moved on every promise that's been made to us so far. At first, people were advised to stay home until it became mandatory. Initially, it was flatten the curve, and then it became until there's a vaccine. So, I think that even when the vaccine comes along, masks will probably still be mandatory. But this tweet does indeed make a very important point. People voluntarily wearing masks are not in control of their own lives or their own minds. They're operating like zombies. The mask has dehumanizing and demoralizing effects on the wearer, but it also visually shows who the regime has conquered physically and mentally. The masks provide no health benefit in preventing infection from the virus, but that's not the point. The mask is a mark, a badge of compliance and subservience to government mandates. Authoritarianism doesn't need to justify itself. Forcing people to wear masks in shops or public transport doesn't need healthcare justification when the populace buy into it and wear masks in places where they aren't required to. At that point, it's simply about seeing who trusts the government and the media propaganda without question. Several months ago, when I first stood outside in a stupid social distancing queue outside a grocery store, I asked a woman in line if she would be okay with going along with this if it was for the rest of her life. If this was just how grocery shopping was from now on. And she said, well, it would be terrible, but if you had to, what could you do? So, this is what you're dealing with. What the crisis has revealed to us is that there's been a huge percentage of the populace who never really understood what freedom meant. They believed that their freedoms and rights weren't inalienable. Now, we never knew just how many of these people were in our society until this crisis came along. And now we know that vast swathes of our fellow citizens believe that their rights and freedoms come from the government, as if the government is like a school teacher or parent with the power to detain or ground them for being bold. Before the forced lockdown kicked in, the government asked people to stay in their homes, like a recommendation. And they knew that not everyone was going to comply. So they used the school classroom tactic of punishing the entire class for the actions of just a few. And what we saw across social media was people who supported the lockdown complaining about their fellow citizens for being the reason that everyone is now forced into their homes. In truth, the government supporting virtue signalers are merely trying to hide their own weakness and cowardice. As Robert Anton Wilson said, the obedient always think of themselves virtuous rather than cowardly. I won't lie. It is depressing spending time in Dublin now, knowing that so many people around you are brainwashed, social distancing signs and stickers are plastered everywhere, the intrusion of the state is now in all aspects of public life, and it's visible at almost every turn. The other eerie thing was just seeing the city completely dead and economically eviscerated. Temple Bar is almost completely closed. Pubs are shuttered. They shouldn't be. They should be open. It's the height of summer. Pubs, bars, and restaurants should be packed and doing a roaring trade, with lots of tourists around. But unfortunately, the tourists aren't here, obviously. Social life is largely shut off for people. There's nowhere to go, really. So a lot of people lose contact with their friends over time. The few pubs that are open have to function as restaurants, and they need to be booked in advance. The pub crawl is over, it seems. You can't simply hop from one place to the next. So we just walked around town with this terribly depressing and foreboding atmosphere. Streets usually busy with shoppers and people enjoying this beautiful, energetic city of ours. Well, it's just completely dead now. There's no one around. Devoid of life, business, and people. The economic devastation is going to be catastrophic. And before anyone thinks that I'm putting the economy before human life, you're an idiot. Destroying an economy destroys people's ability to support themselves. It obliterates their businesses, puts untold numbers of people out of work, and forces people into poverty. It also massively raises taxes. When economies stop functioning for extended periods, what do you think is going to happen? A massive depression. Life expectancy decreases. People can't afford to get access to the health services they need. Disease increases astronomically. Suicides go through the roof. It's almost like this whole COVID lockdown hasn't actually been about healthcare at all. It's been about control of the populace and ensuring that the entire planet accepts a vaccine. Oh, and would you look at that? Another day, another article about the prospect of the COVID-19 vaccine being mandatory. This is from the Irish Times. Strong legal basis for making COVID-19 vaccinations mandatory. Courts might override individual rights in context of contagious disease. Strange. I thought people who were concerned about the vaccine becoming mandatory were just tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists. But of course, as we're now learning in 2020, some conspiracies happen to be true. I need to also read a Facebook post that was published a few days ago by Richie Allen of The Richie Allen Show. How you friends? Little bit of news. I have a couple of mates who work for Google. They both must remain anonymous, of course. They drip feed me bits of information from time to time. Around 4 years ago, one of them told me that the demonetization of alternative news channels would become standard. He was right, as I learned when my original YouTube channel, which had nearly 100,000 subscribers, was deleted for no reason 3 years ago. I heard from him this morning. He told me two things. He said that when the COVID vaccine is ready, or shortly before then, Google/YouTube is planning to take down thousands of channels that have traditionally hosted open discussion about vaccine safety. They will do this, he said, in tandem with Facebook and Twitter. According to him, discussions between all three have already taken place. He reckons it'll be the biggest culling to date of content creators and independent vloggers/commentators. While this may be unsurprising, it is important news, and I trust him implicitly. He also said that it is his belief, and I've said as much myself, that Russian interference claims are nothing but a smokescreen for mass censorship. They, the royal they, know damn well that the Russians are not responsible for spreading anti-vaccine information online, pro-Brexit propaganda, or information about 5G. They know, he said, that these initiatives are grassroots organizations set up by genuinely concerned citizens, but that the easiest way to legislate for them and ultimately to censor them is to blame Russia. Problem, reaction, solution. He's right. Again, I have said as much many times. Last year, Professor Julian Petley, one of the UK's finest journalists and teachers, told me before an interview that he was worried about me. He'd been attending journalist conferences and one or two conferences on fake news. Julian is an unswerving proponent of free speech. He said my name was coming up a lot and that there may be some movement against me or the show. When I told him that I wasn't working for anyone and was broadcasting from a home studio rather than a radio station, he was somewhat relieved, but nonetheless told me to watch my back. This morning my Google mate said that the Richie Allen Show is on a short list of programs to not only be removed from YouTube, which I don't care about at all, but also to be removed from Google search results too. He said the Richie Allen Show replacement channel, which has 31,000 subscribers, has in reality many more, but they're not being counted. Worse still, he said, the viewing numbers are fixed so that less than 1 in 10 views are shown. The point of this, he went on, is to dissuade people from watching, people apparently being more inclined to watch content that's showing hundreds of thousands of views. Now, I couldn't give a fiddler's about YouTube viewing figures or subscribers, as you well know. The bulk of my audience listens live, as it is a live radio show, or they grab the podcast from iTunes, Spotify, Podomatic, etc. And viewing listening numbers say nothing about the quality of a show in any case. But it's important to note this, because they ain't just doing it to me. Yes, indeed, even my own channel has been demoted heavily by YouTube. Asked if there's any concern among his fellow employees about what is happening, my mate said no, or at least nobody has said anything. Maybe they are like him, worried about the prospect of losing a tech job, being labelled a troublemaker and struggling to get another one. Share this widely, as your favourite YouTubers need to know that this mass cull is coming to coincide with the arrival of the COVID vaccine, so that they can back up their videos, something which they should be doing, but many don't. Anyway, thanks for reading. This is the reason that you must get on Gab, Minds, BitChute. Follow me over there and your other favourite content creators who are on YouTube or who have recently been removed from YouTube. So let's shift gears now and talk about the economic consequences of the lockdown, with particular focus on Ireland. This article is from the Burkean and it was written by Herman Kelly, head of the Irish Freedom Party. Ireland, the EU's debt colony. Try again, fail better, writes Samuel Beckett in his 1983 story, Worstward Ho. Micheál Martin obviously took this quip to heart when he went to Brussels and opened the veins of the Irish taxpayer so he could get a pat on the head from his EU masters. The last time Micheál was in cabinet, his government, with a gun to the head from the Troika, put the Irish state on the hook for a sizzling 64 billion euros in Franco-German bank debt. Our grandchildren will be paying it off, and we can now see why this party should be called not Fianna Fáil, but Fianna Failure. In Brussels last week, he failed bigger and better than anybody could have thought. He is in the big seat for 3 weeks, and he sold us out again, this time to the tune of 15.7 billion euros. This is the debt liability placed on Irish taxpayers' shoulders because of his approval of the EU's COVID Recovery Fund. Every man, woman and child in Ireland will be ultimately liable for €3,201 debt from 2028 onwards to fund the EU because Micheál Martin approved this EU fund. Ireland, with less than 1% of the EU's population, is going to be the 5th biggest contributor to the EU bailout. We will be liable for the biggest debt per head of population of any state in Europe, bar wealthy Luxembourg, and it's not as if we can afford it. 15.7 billion euros is a lot of money for a country with a current public debt of 228 billion euro and 25% of its people unemployed. It's almost like they want to create failed states. And it stands 44,365 euros is already owed in public debt by every man, woman and child in the state. We are the third most publicly indebted country in the world. That 15.7 billion euros he vouched to Brussels would have been better invested in Irish schools, hospitals, helping the unemployed back to work and digging small businesses out of bankruptcy caused by the COVID lockdown. Micheál Martin's priority must always be the people of Ireland, yet he worked for anything but the national interest. Indeed, it's almost like Ireland's recent history of trying to be, sycophantically the best pupils in the class when it comes to complying with EU demands is actually immensely damaging to the country. Who could have seen this coming? As a state, we are heavily indebted already without being drawn deeper into the quagmire of the EU's growing debtor union. Yet the raging Europhile political class are protected by the obscurantism and spin of the Irish media, who largely tried to keep Micheál's financial capitulation to Brussels quiet. This has generally been the case for our decades of EU membership. Irish Times Brussels correspondent Naomi O'Leary informs us of the €750 billion EU Recovery Fund, and that money would be borrowed on financial markets by the European Commission, some of it paid off by new taxes, digital and plastic, etc., or custom levies which have not yet been agreed. But eventually, even she gives the game away with her sentence. Member states are ultimately guarantors of the loans, and so would ultimately be on the hook for repayments if all else fails. Nice. Thanks, Micheál. We were told by our political leaders on joining the EU, then Common Market, in 1973, that we would sign up and get loads of dough. But it never worked out that way because Ireland has been a huge net contributor to the EU since we joined. Yes, we received net 44 billion euros cash since we joined according to government figures, but the EU, ECB, IMF, Troika unjustly imposed 64 billion euros of private bank debt on our backs. Our taxpayers ended up bailing out private Franco-German banks. They also progged 18 billion euros from our national pension fund. In addition, EU boats have stripped 215 billion euros worth of fish out of our territorial waters since 1975, according to research by DCU's Dr. Karen Devine using Eurostat figures. Ireland has been a net contributor, in cash terms, to the EU budget since 2013, and in 2018, our net contribution was 720 million euros. The amount of taxpayer cash we shovel to Brussels each year is also set to increase sharply. We at the Irish Freedom Party say it's not worth it anymore, that Ireland should become a sovereign, independent state free of Brussels control and free to work in the best interests of its people. Demographically and democratically, the EU is a dead duck. It was only ever a 1970s solution to a 1950s problem. But times have changed. Soon the EU will have only 15% of the world's GDP, halving since the 1970s. Well said, Herman. It feels like Ireland has been financially propping up a Europe-wide pyramid scheme that's slowly collapsing. You may have also seen this video of Bill Gates.
The strongest analogy is to medicines. And, is there something to worry about with medicines? That is, might some of them have side effects? Do we need safety testing? And we're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. So, yeah, I think maybe we should have a safety system where we, do trials and test things out.
Well, on the subject of safety and concerns about side effects of vaccines, I recently saw this interview he did with CBSN.
The side effects for the Moderna vaccine sound concerning. We looked. After the second dose, at least 80% of participants experienced a systemic side effect, ranging from severe chills to fevers. So, are these vaccines safe?
Just watch his body language here.
Well, the FDA
fixes his glasses, touches his nose. He then takes a big swallow here. Here's another moment. Deep breath. Adjusts his seating position. This looks like discomfort to me. He's also focusing on the FDA regulations as opposed to actually answering the question directly.
Look hard at that. The FDA is the gold standard of regulators, and their current guidance on this, if they stick with that, is very, very appropriate. And the side effects. Side effects were not super severe. That is, it didn't cause permanent health problems for the things there.
The things there. The what? That sentence sort of got away from him, didn't it?
Side effects were not super severe. That is, it didn't cause permanent health problems for the things there.
Shifts in his chair once again. This is the least articulate I've seen him.
That are
Bill,
going out there, and yes, I think
you know the data
US
better than I do.
government.
But the data showed that everybody with a high dose had a side effect.
And it's the only time I've really seen anyone even challenge him remotely on anything. This is a recent interview, by the way, from July 23rd. Most people get over this virus without any complications, but complications from Bill Gates' vaccines are much more common. It's almost like this isn't about healthcare.
Yeah, but some of that is not dramatic, where it's just super painful. But yes,
Yeah, just super painful. Also, what's with the smiling? Everything about this man I just find a little bit off.
How many doses of the vaccine will we need?
well, none of the vaccines at this point appear like they'll work with a single dose. That was the hope at the very beginning. maybe one of them, particularly in the second generation, won't surprise us. We hope just two, although in the elderly, sometimes it takes more. And so making sure we have lots of elderly people in the trial will give us that data.
This is the new norm they want. Multiple vaccines for the entire population forever, it seems. No thanks. People may not have woken up regarding the entire scamdemic and the face mask nonsense, but I gotta tell you, mate, a huge amount of people are not going to take your bullshit vaccine. Speaking of which, this article is from childrenshealthdefense.org, written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Gates pushes experimental technology on 7 billion humans. Pharma has over 170 COVID vaccines in development, but Gates and Fauci pushed Moderna's Frankenstein jab to the front of the line. Scientists and ethicists are sounding alarms. The vaccine uses a new, untested and very controversial experimental RNA technology that Gates has backed for over a decade. Instead of injecting an antigen and adjuvant, as with traditional vaccines, Moderna plugs a small piece of coronavirus genetic code into human cells, potentially altering DNA throughout the human body and reprogramming our cells to produce antibodies to fight the virus. mRNA vaccines are a form of genetic engineering called germline gene editing. It's possible that Moderna's genetic alterations could be passed down to future generations. Well, that's alarming. Also, does anyone else remember thalidomide? In January, the Geneva Statement, the world's leading ethicists and scientists, called for an end to this kind of experimentation. Moderna has never brought a product to market, proceeded through clinical trials, or had a vaccine approved by FDA. The company received an astonishing $483 million in federal funds from the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, a sister agency to Fauci's NIAID, to accelerate development. Dr. Joseph Bolen, Moderna's former research and development chief, expressed shock at Fauci's bet in supporting the company. "I don't know what their thinking was," he told CNN. "When I read that, I was pretty amazed." Moderna and Fauci launched federally funded human trials in March in Seattle. Dr. Peter Hotez warns of potentially fatal consequences from skipping animal studies. As he said to CNN, "If there is immune enhancement in animals, that's a showstopper." Dr. Schwab Siddiqui, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, Moderna's ex-director of chemistry, told CNN, "I would not let the vaccine be injected in my body. I would demand, where is the toxicity data?" Moderna ordered trial participants to avoid unprotected sex or sperm donations. And Gates is promoting that all COVID vaccines be protected by blanket immunity. He hopes to sell his experimental technology to all 7 billion humans and transform our species into GMOs. Sobering. One thing I will say is that there's a lot of resistance to this online, and it's on both sides of the political aisle, as of course it should be. It can be scary to read articles about how your government has ordered millions of doses of a vaccine or how there's legal plans to make it mandatory, but all that has done is prove what we have been saying for months. Now keep in mind that one of the tactics of the left, and indeed the technocrats behind this, is to make us believe that we've already lost, that the fight is futile, and that our worst fears are simply inevitable. The reality is that besides the 77th Brigaders and an army of paid shills and so-called fact-checkers spreading UN propaganda, there is almost zero support for the plans of Bill Gates, and the man has become reviled on social media. Just look at the comments. I mean, while the mainstream media basically give him an armchair ride in their interviews, the comments from the general public are almost universally negative. So here's another video I want to do a response to, and I recently saw this on CNN, and it's just glorious. The mainstream media finally having to acknowledge the concerns of millions of people with respect to Bill Gates and vaccines. This is the most awkward and cringeworthy interview I've watched in ages. It's like a car crash. Take a look at this.
I was reading the New York Times. There are 16,000 Facebook posts espousing conspiracy theories about you and the virus. I've seen these things. They're liked or commented on 900,000 times. On YouTube, the top 10 videos that spread lies about you had almost 5 million views. It's also pointed out that according to Signal Labs, which is a media analysis company that tracks this, misinformation about you is the most widespread of all coronavirus falsehoods.
Classic mainstream media. Just dismiss out of hand any ideas that fall outside of the Overton window, which they control, as being falsehoods without ever having to directly engage with the data, evidence, and research that the alternative media provide.
There's also a conspiracy theory that you're pushing vaccines because you're going to inject people with a tracking device when they get the vaccine. It's all part of a so-called globalist plot to control the world.
Gates has admitted himself that he wants digital immunity certificates as proof of vaccination.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up.
And remember that BBC article that I read recently? Will travel be safer by 2022? There's a portion of the article that reads, "Of course, the best thing to put everyone's worries to rest would be a vaccine. Experts think the vaccine may become available in 2021, as reported in Scientific American. So those traveling would have to keep their vaccination records. Even today, some countries require proof of recent vaccination for disease like yellow fever, and the coronavirus may join that list. Travelers would present the customs officers with an entrance visa and a vaccination record. That could be a paper card or a tiny tattoo on their arm, invisible to the naked eye, but readable by an infrared scanner. This technology already exists and has been tried on live animals and human cadaver skin," said researcher Anna Jeklinek at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Their method uses microneedle patches that can deliver both the vaccine and a squirt of an invisible ink under the person's skin, storing the vaccination record. The macroneedles don't leave scars and are less invasive than the regular needles. It's like putting on a Band-Aid, Jeklinek said. That subdermal record, which means beneath the skin, that subdermal record is readable by a simple scanner, she added. It can even be done with a modified phone. And look at this. Supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the technology was aimed to help in the developing world where paper or electronic records aren't always reliable. The goal is to try it on humans with a measles vaccine soon, but the tech may come handy for other proofs of immunizations, for example, at the immigration point. How long before that becomes, you need to have this thing in order to enter the grocery store, or in order to go to any shop, or in order to get a job? Face masks are merely a precursor to the digital immunity certificate.
It's not at all. I mean, I can tell you, I get stuff from people who seem, they have lives, they have families. I don't know if they genuinely believe this, if they've just been misled. But, and for me, it's, they claim I was on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane and going to his island with Tom Hanks, or just insane, crazy stuff. Do you think, I know internet companies are looking at this. Do you wish that they would play a role in taking stuff down, which is as demonstrably false?
The public cannot determine what's false if the spread of information is limited. We need access to all ideas, including things we may not like or agree with. All that we will be left with, if more and more censorship happens, is biased fact checkers and the mainstream media giving us a one-sided view on everything and telling us to just trust them. Notice that internet censorship has only truly been happening in the last few years as globalism has been challenged.
Because, it does have real-world, it does have real-world impact on vaccines, or, a nut showing up to a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. with a gun.
Yeah, in some cases, they are taking things down.
Like my video with Professor Dolores Cahill.
It's a bad combination, a pandemic and social media, and people looking for very simple explanation. Who's the bad guy here? And a lot of that's been connected to politics, more in the U.S. than in other locations.
Boy, this is a really uncomfortable conversation. Gates seems to be on the back foot here. He's having to explain quite a lot, and he's not quite as articulate as he usually is.
And, of course, vaccines weren't popular with everybody even before this all started. So I'm a big believer in getting the truth out, and
shifting in his chair again.
But it's kind of not as titillating to say, Cooper's innocent. That's not as exciting. You don't forward that to quite as many people as you do
Yeah.
the accusation.
So, time to wrap up this video. Now, I can see a number of things happening. The second lockdown may very well happen in the wintertime. It's been telegraphed in the media for quite a while now. And think about it. It'll be cold and flu season, lots of coughing and sneezing, standard illnesses, head colds, and other types of sicknesses, that we get every season. People will be panicking, though, thinking that they've got COVID, or someone else just sneezed on the bus or in the office. They must have COVID, I guess. This kind of thing will be happening. People will be sent home from work for the slightest sign that they're a little bit under the weather. It's going to be absurd. Any slight bit of sickness will be interpreted as COVID. And of course, mass hysteria is going to ramp up to next levels. There will be a spike in deaths of the elderly because of things like flu and because it's the wintertime. Bugs will be going around the place. It'll be dark and cold in the Northern Hemisphere. It'll be easy for the government, the World Health Organization, and the media to contrive a second spike by once again cannibalizing flu and pneumonia death figures into COVID-19 death certificates. Suffice to say that it'll be easy for them to justify a second lockdown. Initially, lockdowns may be localized to certain towns and cities like we're seeing at the moment, but I can see another global lockdown. I could be wrong, and I'm not trying to depress anybody. I just want to be honest with you with respect to what I think could happen. But they're going to want to bring society to its knees so that people beg for the vaccine as the supposed solution to this big problem. I also think people need to be mindful that the stress of this entire year could very well take its toll on many of us. Stress alone can lower the immune system, and there will probably be an inordinate amount of sickness this winter just by dint of the stress alone, to say nothing about how social distancing and all the hand sanitizing will have limited people's exposure to good bacteria, germs, and viruses that they need to maintain a healthy immune system. If another lockdown happens, and it's made more draconian this time, tensions between friends and families will be short. Don't be surprised if outdoor exercise is banned this time, by the way. I have a feeling they might try that kind of thing. Nerves are going to be frayed. You'll be trying to calm people down. You're going to try and help them see reason and convince them that the vaccine is a trap, and maybe they won't listen. They may get very angry with you. It might be very hard to reason with them because they're going to want the hell of the lockdown to end, and they will be convinced by the media that the only way for that to happen is for them to submit to the vaccine. I do predict, however, on a more positive note, that there is going to be a dawning on people that this entire year has been all about the vaccine and that this entire agenda has been pushed way too far, way too fast. A vaccine cannot possibly be developed so quickly and also be safe. And more than that, a lot of people won't want to take it because more and more people will come to terms with the fact that the fatality rate is in line with the flu. In addition, there's been a lot of work done already in changing hearts and minds and red-pilling millions of people globally. The turnout on Saturday in Dublin proves that there is a public awakening taking place, albeit slowly. We're still in the minority, and there's a long way to go, but it only takes a small percentage of people to throw a spanner in the works of this machine in order to bring it to a grinding halt. Keep in mind that the monsters behind this agenda are going to have to go to extreme lengths to achieve their goals. And as they encounter resistance, they're going to have to become more desperate and more vicious. The lengths they're willing to go by themselves will have a kind of red-pilling effect on many people because they will finally see the mask slip, no pun intended. The true face of evil will be revealed. That doesn't mean we simply sit and wait for things to get bad. You have to get active, find peaceful protest movements in your area, in your city, civil society groups, attend events, contact local politicians who are willing to listen, and continue to share this kind of content as far and wide as you possibly can. It isn't over until it's over. Thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to share it wherever you can and subscribe on BitChute, Gab, and Minds, like I've said, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.